afternoon, well, to almost everyone, and maybe good morning to those joining from this North America. And today we have another interesting session. And as you can see from the title, it's a lot that Alan is put together for us, in this 1 hour session. And I've been in many of his sessions. It's always fully packed with value. Is not the type who does the marketing. Is much more giving value. It doesn't just try to market something and ask you to reach him later. So you're going to find a lot of value in today's session. It's about array constants. It's got an interesting way of even sharing advanced concepts. So even if you think this looks like some really tough things, don't worry, you're going to get it. And just to quickly mention that this session is brought to you by Your BizEdge and MHS Analytics. Your BizEdge is a Nigerian data analysis, consulting, and financial modeling training firm. We started this webinar in 2020 to make it easy for people to keep remembering what they've learned and just to be a way of continuous learning for people within the community. And it's free. It's always been free. And we also have a digital resource link. Maybe I'll just share this in the chat. So you can get some are free, some are paid, but at least you can get the free resources, templates, and those who want to take the advanced financial modeler exam. You also have access to the free mock exam like question, not like we're going to invigilate you. Then MHS Analytics is our Canadian entity. So for those maybe in North America, this might be the more convenient entity to engage us by. And now to the main agenda for today. Our speaker is Alan Murray. He's a Microsoft MVP and Excel trainer. I've been following him for many years before I even knew that I existed. So he's someone who's been consistent and is someone who I like that he focuses so much on value. I've used a lot of his blog articles, and then occasionally I search for things and Computer Gaga YouTube channel shows up. So I'm sure some of you also are in same shoes as me, that you've come across his content one way or the other. And today we have, once again, fortunate to have him. This is probably, I think this is his second time presenting in our series. And I'm going to share his LinkedIn. I'll also share his website link and YouTube, and also the link for Excel Meetup London. So he's someone who has been holding the Meetup community in London for Excel, I think also for maybe 3 years. So I'm going to hand over to him now so that he has all the time he needs for this session. So Alan, over to you.
Listen, thanks, Michael. Okay, everyone should be able to hear me all right. Let me just get some screen sharing going. That one. Been having some fun with Teams for the last I don't know, X number of minutes. So apologies for any delay. Jumping straight in, you should be able to see my screen. As Michael says, my name's Alan. Thank you for all the kind words Michael just said about me. And yeah, I do try and bring value, and I also try and bring something different to, most of these events. So I speak at a lot of kind of webinars and meetups, and I host my own meetup. And there's nothing wrong with delivering the same presentation in different places, but always try and change something, or often do something completely new, which sometimes leads me into trouble because I've made mistakes, and it's all fun. So I picked something quite niche today. I thought, well, nobody really talks about array constants. I wonder if I can make a whole session on array constants. So this is that, something that hopefully nobody's really dedicated a session to before. We'll see what it's like, eh? So moving into it, I mean, Michael said a few things about me, and he said I'm not really one to promote and stuff, which is true. I don't really like that stuff. So I normally bring up a slide like this, like Michael did, and then say that I talk about Excel a lot, and then move on and focus on our plan, which is really 3 different things. So first of all, what are array constants? So if anyone is coming into this kind of new and is not really sure what I'm talking about, we'll find out pretty soon, and you'll probably recognize them. You may just not know them by that term. And throughout the course of the session, we'll find out where you can kind of find these things pop up, and then a few maybe practical cases of their use. So getting into this, so what are array constants? This is the last slide, do not worry about that. Not one for slides either. But an array constant is a set of values, a set of constant values. So you may be familiar with the term arrays, whether that be from Excel or be from outside Excel. In Excel, they are arranged in these curly braces, and especially in modern Excel, although there's nothing new about array constants, they are a slightly bigger deal nowadays because we have these dynamic arrays and we have this native array engine. So although they're nothing new, you're more likely going to see them and potentially even write them. And we'll see both of those in this session. Got a couple of arrays shown on those bullet points. This can change based on regional settings, but based on where I am in the UK and that kind of stuff, a comma is used to separate the columns of an array. So that first one is this kind of one-dimensional array of constants, constant being a fixed or static value. So I've got 1, 2, 5 in one row. And then the second one being a 2 by 2 array. I've got 1, 2 in the first row, 3, 4 in the second row, the semicolon being used to separate the row there. And it mentions values are constant and they offer an alternative to a range. So if it is a fixed value that is never going to change or very rarely changes, we do not need to store these kind of lists or these kind of arrays in ranges or tables or some, kind of on the grid structure. It's simply not necessary. And it's maybe potentially bloating up a file when we think about formatting that stuff and then unnecessary. So seeing some examples of this stuff, here we go. These files can be provided, by the way, before that question comes up. I just realised I haven't shared these. But first of all, to see some simple examples of these. So I showed an example in the slide there of what an array can look like. So we can build these arrays ourselves, although in practical cases, they're often created by other functions or formulas are generating them, and then we need to know how to manipulate them, which as in modern Excel is a big thing, generally speaking. So in terms of kind of creating something silly, I could just build up a kind of virtual range, a kind of array right now in any cell. Bit of a silly example here, but by typing equals, putting in those curly braces that I said would need to do. If I'm going to write a string, I can use my double quotes for a string, and I'm just going to proceed and build like a small example of an array, similar to what I showed in the slide. So I've got name and number as a couple of headers at the moment. I've got a comma separating them, so that's 2 columns, and then the double quotes because they're a string. Semicolon would indicate a new row. So from here, I could put in somebody's name, such as Michael. Comma, I could put in a number like 3, and another semicolon, start a new row. And maybe just to put one more in, if I was to put in Hope, comma, maybe let's put in 45 as a value, and I'll close off the curly brace. And if I was going to press enter on such a thing, that would produce this spill range, because in Excel 365, we have this array capability. And you can see it's put the text on the left, numbers on the right. So it's all normal stuff in terms of Excel use. And I just wrote that array straight into Excel. Oops, wrong shortcut there. So it wasn't a wrong shortcut, it's because I restarted my machine. Give me 1 second. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's a really practical case for an array right now. If you're looking at that and thinking, but why would I do that? What's the benefit of writing it like that? Why not just write it normally? And the answer is really that you wouldn't. You would just write it normally. I'm just showing at the moment how an array is structured. And if you were not aware of that, or maybe just basic awareness before this session, then that can be good to know when you do stumble across it in more realistic cases. The comma separating column, semicolon for a row, you know, usual use when it comes to a string versus a numeric value. Now, in terms of coming across it, I've got a formula that's already written here. We'll probably write all the others, depending how many examples we get through. I've got a few planned ready for it. But in this example, I've got a formula that I've noticed comes up a lot when I'm using formula by example in Excel Online, which I'm normally using when I'm in my training and I'm showing people different features. But whenever you ask it to extract stuff, they always go for this index text split scenario, which is a weird approach to it. But I'm going to use this as an example to show you, if there was an issue with this formula, or if I just wanted to try and understand this formula a bit more, like how does this work? Then I could select the text split part of this function. And I don't know how visible this is on screen because it's pretty tiny. But again, in modern Excel, we get this value. Oh, my drawing's not going very well there. Value preview tooltip. That went completely wrong. Let me do a different shortcut. Just zoom in on it. But as I hover over it, we get this value preview tooltip. What is going on today? This little box pop up above that shows us that output array. So hopefully you can see that. I can see it's as text because it's a text function. So I know I wrote a moment ago the numeric values without the quotes, and this has it because it's a text function. The 7, the carve, shall we say, and then the 59. Comma separated, so I know the different columns. And I guess one of the big skills of this is not, as I say, necessarily writing it like I did a moment ago, but when you're trying to diagnose a formula or understand a formula or something, and you see things like this, it's great when you can look at it and think, oh, I know exactly what that means and why it's doing it, which is obviously golden when you're trying to fix issues. And a lot of people I train, they can write stuff and do stuff, but they don't always know why they're doing it, which is not good to hear. It's quite worrying. Now, coming back to it, just to finish this off, if you are interested, once that text split comes out with the, that 3-column array that we saw, index is then waiting to extract whatever's in that second position of it, which ultimately ends up with what we have here. So that's just us not necessarily writing an array, but somebody's written this formula for us, or formula by example, an Excel feature online where you give it an example and it writes a formula for you, has written that, and you're thinking, how does that work? Yeah, and understand that will help us. Now, coming into some examples ourselves in writing these. So I'm going to see if I can get stuff on screen. Here we go. It's more like it. I couldn't see the chat or anything, so I'm just bringing that up on my other screen. Here we go. So in case anything goes in there. Now, I can't speak for you guys on the call right now, but for me, probably the first time I really became aware of array constants, like really paid attention to them, I'm sure I've seen them before this moment, was when I saw people using it with a VLOOKUP way back in the day to reverse the order. So obviously nowadays we have alternative functions, or back then we did, but it was gymnastics between multiple functions rather than one, and how we can get VLOOKUP to look to the left. So in this example, if somebody was looking for the score to return the grade, and in this table on the right, I can see that the grade is the first column, score is the second. And we probably know that VLOOKUP only looks in the leftmost column, so it can't return that. I can't look for the score and return the grade. It's the wrong way around. And yes, I could change it, couldn't I? But what people would often do in this scenario, if they really wanted that VLOOKUP approach over the kind of better index and match approach way back when, was they would use an excellent function called choose, very probably underrated and underused function. You'll probably see it more than once today. And with this choose function, we would give it an array. So in goes those curly braces. I'd put 1, 2 in there, close off the curly brace. So I've given it a 2-column array of 1 and 2, comma. And then this choose function will ask me, okay, you've given me the index number. You've actually given me 2 because you've given me an array, a 2-column array. Now give me the values that relate to that. And I would feed it the values. So I could feed it the score column first, comma, followed by the grade column. And what this would do, if I just close bracket on that at the moment, is that would create this array. So it looks a bit funny at the moment because it's all crushed in with the other stuff, but I can see I've kind of reversed the order. I've put the score first and the grade second in this little area here. And because I'm in modern Excel, it's spilling, but even going back 10, 15 years, we could write this in an array formula. We just wouldn't really see it like this and it wouldn't be so easy. But I've kind of built a virtual array that I could then run the VLOOKUP on. So around that, I could then say VLOOKUP. The lookup value is the score in cell C3. What's the table array? Well, that is what choose is. Choose is creating that table array for me, putting the columns the alternative way round. So I can then say comma 2, comma true as it would be right now. So I'm doing a range lookup and I have a VLOOKUP that's able to look to its left. And this is kind of an old school technique that if you're using an older version of Excel, you might appreciate if you don't like the index approach and that. But if you're using the modern version, is kind of in the dust. There's not really much reason to do this. But this is probably one of the first reasons pre-array era where I stumbled across and thought, oh, what's this curly brace 1, 2 business? I've never done that with choose. And then people using it to build that virtual array and look to its left. Pretty cool stuff. Now, moving into how we could use that in maybe a more compact solution and maybe a more modern approach as well, is that, yes, I've got this table on the screen. There's nothing wrong with that. If I need it within other formulas or parts of Excel, whatever those things will be, charts, pivot tables, etc., then it's quite handy to have it there. But if I'm not, and if it doesn't change regularly, do I even need it there at all? Would be a question. So what I could do, emphasis on the could there, is I could bring in a couple of array constants for each column instead and use them. So let me show you what I mean. And rather than typing this out, because that doesn't sound like fun, I'm going to sneak in a little formula, a bit like Michael said. I love to throw things in like out of nowhere. So I can use a function called array to text. And if I select that, let's go for the first one first, I guess. I'll get mixed up easy, so hopefully I don't. If I select that first column, I can see the array just above, by the way. And then if I, whoops, don't do that. If I ask this array to text with a comma to use the strict version, which is option 1, what they call strict, and close bracket, that will just produce an array for me. So not many reasons to want to do that, but rather than me sitting here like I did at the start, when I was writing in name, number, Michael, 3, I'll get them to do this for me. Then I'll do the same for the other one. If I just do another array to text, and I'll just get them to convert this into array so that I don't have to type it. That would be lovely, comma 1, bracket, thank you very much. Then I'm going to select these two and just quickly change them from formulas to values. So Control C to copy, Control Shift V for paste values, Control Shift V, one of the best new shortcuts you'll know. And I've got my 2 values built up pretty quick and without any typos or anything, because I've got Excel to work for me. I don't work for Excel. Now I'm going to put them into names. So with this first one, I'll just select the text that I've happily got produced now as a value. I'll just take a copy of that. And I'm going to define a couple of names. So define names are another big area of Excel that's been around forever. but has got a new lease of life in recent years. With dynamic arrays coming out, people started using them a bit more. And then with the invention of lambdas, people are all over these names now, like they didn't exist prior to a few years ago. But these names have always been around, always been useful. Yeah, and I'm going to use them to define a name right now. A named constants. So if I click formulas and define name, and if I give this a really terrific name, what did I just copy, Tim? Just paste it in. Did I copy the first one? Let's paste that in there. Find out, shall we? Yeah, I copied the first one. So I'll give it a good name like scores grades. Score grades, score grades. So I'll call them score grades. I've got my array of constants in there. I'm going to click OK. That will save it as score grades. And I'll just quickly do the same for the other one. Take a copy of that. Define a name. Call it maybe score values. Something good. Something maybe better than that. And if I paste that in, I've got the other one. I'll keep them there just in case anybody wants to look at them for some reason. But I'm going to ruthlessly destroy this. Such a risk. Oh dear, my formula's not happy. But then within my formula, I can come back in and fingers crossed where I've got the two refs. I've got no idea why. I could go, what am I doing? Scores, so score values. And now I've got my names, my named constant score values. And the second one is my score grades. Score grades. And this should work exactly as it did before. So I've removed the physical table, which I'm not saying this is definitely a good thing, because if you need that table for other reasons, it's good to have around that single source. It's dynamic. But if I don't, if this is like the only reason, and how often do our score thresholds change? Maybe never, maybe every few years. I could put it as a named constant, because then I'm avoiding having to store things on the grid and formatting, possible security issues. It's a bit safer in there, maybe hidden in the name. And I can utilize it still just as easy by referring to names. So storing things as array constants there. Obviously, this is an old approach, as I mentioned, with VLOOKUP and choose, which is awesome. But if you were to make it a bit more modern, there would be nothing wrong with bringing in, many people's friend nowadays and just converting this around into what we need. And -1. I've got this right now. I've got the XLOOKUP alternative. Looking for that down the score values, returning for the score grades, skipping the if not found, and -1 for that closest less than. And it's just going to work as before. XLOOKUP utilizing array constants rather than your normal kind of data's in a table approach. So on that note, moving along a bit, I'll keep chugging along and things come up awesome. Just going to go through some examples. This one's a very modern example. It's using a function called TextSplit. This one's actually coming straight out of the book. That just got put into the chat window, this one. The last one's not. All the examples are, but not that exact example. Ish. This one pretty much is stolen from their direct. Stolen from my own material, I should add. It's all right if I steal it. But this is using a function called TextSplit. What is that, 2 years old maybe? But how the ability to understand array constants is arguably more relevant now than what it was in the past. More common for sure. Maybe relevant is, I'm not sure if that's fair to say or not. But a scenario here is looking at the data. We want to extract this into this array down here, or what will become an array. Currently, it's just a bunch of cells on a sheet. But we can see that the name of the person would end here. So Melody Bailey would end here. There's a space and a bracket separating her name from the email address. We've then got this closing bracket on the end, which signifies the end of the email address. And then we've got the semicolon and a space that signifies the start of a new name. So in this example, that would be the beginning of a new row because we're putting our names in rows. Now we can do that all in one formula thanks to this text split. So in cell A5, I could start my text split and it asks you quite a few questions, just like a lot of the modern functions do. You know, XLOOKUP, text before, they're quite overwhelming for people are trained who are quite new to Excel. You get this massive function come up, it's quite intimidating, but try not to be too intimidated. I mean, all of these are optional for a start. But the first thing it wants is the text. And I've only got one cell here to imagine I've got this data from some email or something. And that is cell A2. So let me just click on A2. Comma, what is the column delimiter? Well, this is where the array constants knowledge would come in, because we have two. We have a space bracket indicating a change from name to email, and in the bracket indicating the end of the email. So really we've got kind of two column separators here. And to put in two, no surprise here, curly braces. It is not just one string value. I need two, therefore an array of static values like constants. So I'm going to say that the first one will be space bracket. So I have put a space in there, but it's naturally difficult to see. I'll put in a comma, and then the second one will be the closing bracket. And I'll close off my curly brace. So this can get pretty confusing and pretty messy pretty quick because we've got loads of brackets going on here and double quotes. But here we can see one of the constants, and here we see the second one. You know, the double quotes really being the thing that identifies them, the comma in between. Tell you that I have two. Then I can put in my comma. You know, I'm back to the function here. And if you don't use it much yourself, this stuff, I can't imagine a world without this little thing. I don't think I would have written a formula book if that didn't exist. Row delimiter tells you where you are. Row delimiter's going, what is it? Semicolon. And that should do me, really. Ignore empty, it's optional. Yeah, don't ignore any empties. Or yes, ignore the empties. Not that I've got any. But let's close this off and run it. And then one formula produces all of our results. Yeah, thanks to all. There's a little space just before Eddie here. I don't know if you can see that. There's a bit of padding here. Prices for anyone who puts in the chat what I should have done. There's no prices. Michael will give you a price. I'm going to change it so if anyone's fast on the fingers, if you know where it is. I need to put a space up here, just like I did with a bracket. Where I put that space bracket, there is a space after the semicolon as well. So it's not dealt with that. Let me put that in. And now that little space is gone. Ooh. So a reason why these array constants are surfacing a bit more nowadays, you know, text split, requiring it there if I want to provide more than one split, more than one column delimiter. Now, the next example as I move on is an example with an if function. Many people's favorite function. Pretty good one, isn't it? Now, something you don't really see me do much. Have data in a table that's not a table. Controversial stuff. Maybe it's better to have it in the table. But the reason I haven't is because I'm about to write an array formula, and you cannot write arrays in tables. So that kind of eliminates that. So whether this is good or not, you might prefer to put it in a table and do a non-array approach, because the benefits of tables possibly outweigh the benefits of the array here. I don't know. But let's see what we're doing. They're doing an if function. They can handle arrays. If functions are super. They don't spill, but they can handle arrays internally. So in this example, let's make something up. Maybe I give a 10% discount. 10%. Believable, isn't it? But I only give it if their status, the status of these customers, let's say it's either B or it is D, either B or D. Now, one way we could do that, as I'm sure we're all aware, is we can use our OR function in here. I could ask if that cell is equal to B, and it's not case sensitive, although we could make it, comma, or if that cell, the same cell, is equal to D. And I haven't got my if there yet, but this will do the evaluation to true or false. You see it's center aligned in capitals, the kind of Boolean value there. And I've got my falses for the likes of A, but my trues for the likes of B and D. So that's amazing. That works. Who cares? And I could do that in a table because that's not an array. I've referenced these kind of scalar values and provided one string. But to convert it into where array constants could be used, I could shorten that. I could get rid of this business here. That business, I need that one, and wrap it into array constants instead. So if I put some curly braces here, and let's try not to mess this up. Do I need curly braces there? And I've only got two options here. You know, if I had maybe 5 options, this would look a bit more impressive. You know, there's B2 equal to this, B2 equal to that, B2 equal to this, B2 equal to that. And these are reasons to bring in a function called switch as well. Switch is generally better at these multiple testing than if and or can be. But I'm going to ask if B2 is equal to, and I'm giving it that string. So what this will mean is that when I press enter, it just works like it did before. And off the back of this, I can actually throw in my if function, which is what it's all about, and say if that logical test evaluates to that, then do 10%. If they don't, then do 0%. Now, I wrapped that in pretty quick, so it's about to come on screen. But just showing the example again, array constants, you know, you want to test multiple things within an or an and function, and we might be used to having to separate them into separate arguments. And if you've got 2, not so big a deal. Great for learning though, to keep it concise. But if you've got more than that, if you've got 10, that's a mouthful. And you might decide, I could reference the cell value only once if I put them in an array constant. Unfortunately though, because arrays don't work with tables, you will get a spill error. So I've had to keep this as a range for that reason. Yeah, more examples of array constants in our life. Onwards we go. I'm going to fit this in lovely. Don't know if I'll do the filter one on the end. Let's see how we do. But this next example is going to be, I've got these regional sales, yeah? So I've got a table, back to tables. And in this table, we, as you can see, we've got some regions, like country, we've got some continents and units sold in total. And what we want to do is produce a report. And this report, I think, did I write it already? If I click on report, I've done some of the job already. Yeah, could have wrote this now. Maybe we should write it now. Now, in here, you can see I've got a few things that are set up already. I've got a drop-down list in here. Currently, it has Africa written in it. But that is a drop-down list that can be changed. Let me show you. I think we're all happy with drop-down lists, probably. I've always got a cheeky merge cell. I hope nobody complains at me about merging. It's all right. It's outside the range. Controversial use. I can go to Europe, go to North America. I like to tease, and to Asia. And big thing, drop down list. Let's switch it back to Africa. Now, with that drop down list down here, obviously we're getting some results. I've also got a drop down list here, by the way. this is a drop-down list I'll show you in a moment of 3 different aggregations. So names of 3 different functions. In here, let's have a look at the formula. That's why the formula bar was quite a few rows high, by the way. If you wondered why it was so high to begin with, was knowing that this was coming. So it's 5 lines high. And we've got this filter function, awesome dynamic array function. And there are cleaner alternatives to this, but I've brought in the choose function again, partly because of what we're talking about today. And I've got an array constants again, because we're kind of on that topic, doing the 1, 2, 3, and I'm using that to extract specific columns from that table. You might remember that there were 4 columns. There was a region, then there was a continent, and then there was units sold and total. And I don't want the continent because the continent's been chosen here. It'd be a bit silly if I brought it back in the table. You know, it just says Africa all the way down it. So I've omitted it by using the approach that I just did earlier with the VLOOKUP and the XLOOKUP. Well, actually, I didn't do this next with a VLOOKUP of using the choose function. A cleaner alternative would be a function called chooseCols, or maybe even the index function would be cleaner. Possible benefit of choose, even nowadays though, is that I get to specify the names. Now, when you use things like chooseCols or index, you have to use index numbers, which is fine. You know, people who use computers a lot love an index number. Excel people who don't use computers a lot hate index numbers. Hence why everyone moaned about it when VLOOKUP asked for a column number all those years. So a bit like XLOOKUP here, I'm able to explicitly reference the tables when I do choose versus the likes of chooseCols. There's pros and cons to both, you know. Anyway, back on topic, it's filtering for that continent, which I think we already know that because we can see the results, like Nigeria. Now, what we want to do though to add on to this is, I mentioned there's a drop down here for average, sum and count. I mentioned it was aggregation, didn't tell you what, but there's some average and count in there. And I don't know if I bother doing both of these. I think once you know one, you know the other, really, don't we? But maybe I want to do it for units sold here. And I want to create the calculation on that unit sold, on those filtered results. But I want that to only be, I want the calculation to be whatever somebody is selecting from this first drop down. Yes, if they choose sum units sold, they choose count, then count units sold, and you get the idea. I've only got 3 calculations there. Just bear in mind, this could be any calculation that works. Anything. Could even be a text join. Right, but I'm going for sum, average, and count. I'm struggling to talk this afternoon, aren't I? Right, this is going to be a sexy formula. Get ready for something sexy. In the formula bar, I'm going to use the let function. Just trying to shoehorn in any extra things we can, I guess. So I'm going to use let because my plan is to create 2 variables, which I'm just trying to remember what those variables are. If you haven't noticed, I'm not filling any notes. I like to wing it, and mistakes can be nice learning sometimes. But if you're new to it, it asks you to create a name. So obviously we've seen a name manager today because I used it earlier with the XLOOKUP, VLOOKUP examples. Yeah, I did that array to text, built the array, copied it into a name, and built those names. And those names have workbook scope by default. When it refers to a name here, this name is only available in let. It's not available outside of this formula. So it's great kind of short-term use, similar to variables in macros from the Excel world. And I can create a name and I can assign a value to it. So for a first name here, Alt enter for a new line. I want to know what function they've chosen. Did they choose average? Did they choose sum, or did they choose count? And I think it's in the order of sum, average, count. So I want to do that order. So I'm going to choose it. Crikey, my talking, I'm really struggling. I'm going to call it chosen function, avoiding any spaces. So that's the name of this kind of variable, this parameter, whatever term you want to assign, is chosen function. And what's it going to be? I need to know what they chose. And I'm going to use what am I going to use here? Completely forgotten what I'm doing. I'm going to use a match function. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a match function here because I want to return an index number. My goal is to go and use the choose function again. I warned you it'll be 2 or 3 times more. And choose runs off an index number. So match returns index numbers, as we know because of its generic use with index. With match, I'm going to ask it to look for the value that's in cell B4. Just trying to remember if I've created this other name or not, but I'm going to reference what's in B4. You know, that could be the name sum, average, or count. I put in a comma. I'm about to find out if I've written it already or not. No, I haven't. All right. Let me just pause on this for a moment. Just going to stick a little apostrophe, a little single quote at the start of the formula, just so I can press enter and kind of pause where I am. I can deal with that column height afterwards. I don't want to lose the effort that I've put into that. So I'll just kind of pause it there because I've just realised I haven't created the array constants in a name yet. I thought I did that in advance, like the filter, but I obviously haven't. Because my plan is to create a name called functions list that lists those functions in that order. Let me write it on the sheet first, because then it's easier to check whether there's any issues with it. You know, if I forget to do a double quote, the sheet will happily tell me that in a more meaningful way than the name manager does. Curly braces, sum. Oh, hang on, I haven't. Talking about double quotes and mistakes. I've realised that one myself though. Comma, next one's going to be average, next one's going to be count. Awesome. Sum, average, and count, all with their double quotes, comma separated, curly braces, press enter, it spills, but that's not how we want to use it. We don't care about that. What we care about is to take a copy of that. And then if I'm feeling confident, I can wipe them out and go into define name on the formulas tab, just like we did earlier, and give it a name like functions list and paste it into the box. So it's building up this array constant of sum, average, and count. Once again, it's the kind of list that you're probably not going to change a lot. It's not like every day, every week, every month, you think, oh, let's change the function. It's the kind of list that wouldn't change much. So rather than storing it somewhere on a sheet or some physical location, which potentially leaves it open to being affected by your colleague inserting a row or doing something like this to cause trouble, like accidentally cause trouble. By putting in a name, it's pretty safe. You know, nobody's really going to touch it if they have to go to name box even for that. So I'm deciding to do that approach and store it as array constants rather than, you know, a typical range, like write it on the sheet. With that done, let me go back to my formula. Let me take out that little placeholder I had, that little apostrophe, so it turns from text back into a formula. And I'll type in the functions list. So the reason I knew that I hadn't created it beforehand a minute ago is because it didn't come up when I started typing functions list. Oh my, functions list. It's fun, isn't it? Comma 0, close bracket. Comma. So at this point, just pausing every bit. I mean, this here is the main reason for the demo, because I've got an array constants and that's what the session's about. But stay tuned for non-array constant learning. So the functions list is in there. That's an array constants. You know, if you're an Excel user and you just look at this formula that someone wrote and you think function list, I can see that's the name of something. Name of what? It's not till you go to that name manager and you'll see, it's constants. You know, it could be a table, it could be a named range. But this is the array constants. So what match function is going to return the value? So currently you've got average in there, which is option 2. You may remember I put sum, average, count. So chosen function at this point would say 2. So with that knowledge in hand, next thing I want to know is I want to extract just this column from my spill range. So you might recall that that cell there that currently says Nigeria is the only cell here that has a formula, and it has that filter function that's bringing back that 3 column wide, 4 row high. It's dynamic, so it's not always 4 rows high, but definitely 3 columns wide. Spill range, that array. Now I only want units sold, so I need to extract units sold from there. Many ways, as we know, but in this example, choose is maybe not the best route. And what I'm going to do, column, I want to say column to calc. That's the name of my name. And I'm going to use index. A big fan of index. If you've seen me present before, you may hear me talk about index. So any excuse to bring it in, I don't think it's actually been written yet. Choose cols would be the natural thing to do right now, but I'm anything but natural. Array, I'm going to choose that cell and trigger the spill range with the hash, comma, ignore the rows, comma, 2. So at this point, I'm using the index function to extract column 2 from the spill range in B7. Yeah, because it's at the moment it's 3 columns wide. You can see it's all red on screen. But I want to perform an aggregation like average and sum, and I've got a numeric column over here as well. So if I do a sum, it's going to start 8 numbers right now. So I need to make sure, look, I just need that second column from there. And index is beautiful for that. Look how tiny that formula is, how concise that is. Love it. Just the name choose cols is wider than that. Right, Alt Enter. Now it's time for calculation. Left says, right, give me another name, or maybe it's time to actually do your calculation. And that would be the one right now. And I said I'd do choose, didn't I? Choose, because choose asks for an index number. And I have the match function involved, which returns index numbers. So the answer to the index number is chosen function, comma. Yeah, sorry, getting mixed up there. Yeah, it's the chosen function. And then for the values, I'm actually going to give it functions. So the first one will be to sum column to calc. Thanks, Celia. Next up is going to be to average column to calc. And then next up is going to be to, oh yeah, it's 57. This will be my last example. Count column to calc. I'm just coming to its end. Let me just finish this off. So what I've got here, choose function, chosen function name, which is going to be an index number, and then it's just picking the calculation from it. Either sum the column to calc, average the column to calc, or count that column to calc. And that, remember, is column to calc, is the extracted column. This bracket at the end is the closing one for let. So if I press enter, that produces the answer. Let me sort out that row height. But if I change average to sum, I get the sum of units sold. If I choose count, I get a count of units sold. And yeah, this is a trick that you can find in my kind of books and obviously in a million other places. Don't have to come to me. YouTube channels and blogs and maybe previous meetups at this platform and stuff. And there's different ways of doing it. But I've used the choose function, which is great for that. And most important of all, because of the topic I'm choosing to deliver here, this kind of niche topic, is that I incorporated an array of constants to keep the list off the grid. You know, this kind of list doesn't need to be there. I can write it straight into the name manager and access it through the likes of match functions or not. So in the conclusion here, as we approach 4 o'clock, just kind of wrap up on this, I've shown a few examples which are hopefully kind of practical scenarios for it. You know, this one with a match function, we saw the if function, you know, putting arrays in an or function here. Text split, very much native, you know, the dynamic array of constants being used there for multiple column delimiters. And I did an example with lookups, which A I mentioned is one of the first times that I truly took notice of them, like many years ago. And it also gave me the chance to squeeze in some things like the array to text function, which is quite new, producing arrays. And if Microsoft are producing functions to do that, something's afoot. And also the Paste Special as a cheese shortcut to remove values. With the value preview, just going kind of back through the story here. In conclusion, we you see these arrays a lot when you're building these up. You'll see arrays. So being able to interpret them correctly is almost an essential Excel skill. If you write formulas in modern Excel, you kind of got to know your array constants. That's why I thought I'd squeeze in a session on it. If there are any questions, I think if Michael's happy, this is the point where we break from me to potential questions.
Okay. But by the way, I know we started, I think, about 12 minutes late. So if you maybe, like I said, we are not so very strict on. We don't have a session for the next 1 hour. So we still, if you want to take at any, I know you have filter and one other sheet. If you want to take one of them, it's okay. In the meantime, if there are any questions from anyone, please feel free to ask. By the way, I don't know if you want to squeeze in a few minutes to mention your 2 books. Online, a lot of people have been doing a lot of testimonials saying how well they have learned a lot from it, and it's kind of different from what most people write on in Excel. So you decided to pick a niche and do a deep writing on some aspects that are not so well covered. I don't want to spill the beans, so I'll let you do maybe, a quick talk about your books.
Sure. I don't like doing this stuff, Michael. I've got a sheet on this file, which, as I say, I'm happy to share this file, both the completed version as well, if I just save this as it is, which has got some contact details about me. But these are a couple of books that I've written in the last, I think, over the last 4 years. Advanced Excel Success came first, followed by Formulas, which I think came out August 22. Just reading the chat, sorry. Thanks, team. Advanced Excel Success just covers a lot of modern approaches, Power Pivot, Power Query, hints and tricks and formulas. Advanced Excel Formulas, as its name suggests, lots of formulas. It's over 800 pages. There's over 550 formulas in there, I think. So that took a while to write, let me say. It's good, fun. Thanks for the comments, team, in the chat.
I see a question from, or maybe it's a comment. Let me see. It's a question. So Pranam is asking, from a performance perspective on very large files, which is better, non-dynamic array functions, dynamic array functions, or let/lambda functions?
It's hard to say. I think it depends. But let is definitely good from a performance perspective. That one is for sure. Especially if, in this example, I used the let function really. Oh no, I did use it actually in this way, I guess. Like if I go back to my formula, actually I'm not sharing on mine, let me just share again for a sec. It's a pretty basic example of it, but what I'm about to say regarding let, rather than putting, just for everyone's benefit, not necessarily the question asker who may know this side already based on the question, but rather than me putting that function right there into these 3 times, by using let, I was able to do the calculation only once. So the calculation is performed once, assigned to a name, and then the name is referenced 3 times. So for people who use Power BI, it's a bit like creating measures in some ways. You're creating that measure once and you're just reusing it, and it doesn't slow down the the calculation. So in terms of let is definitely, when it comes to complex calculations, a way of A, making it more meaningful and readable, but B, in terms of the question, improving kind of calculation speed. With lambda, I'm not too sure, and with in terms of dynamic arrays, it depends on the formula. So I guess in a generic sense, they should improve speed. But in specific functions, I've read various kind of articles where they compare things like index versus VLOOKUP versus XLOOKUP, and XLOOKUP doesn't always win despite its absolute referencing and being an array formula and stuff. So I guess and I think filter, I use filter here. I believe I'm right in saying, now I'm not a big one on calc speed, but I believe filter is slow in terms of calculations, and that's the dynamic array. But I think it depends. Don't cast them all with that stick. I believe I've read that filter's slower than the likes of XLOOKUP and stuff. Because it uses criteria, So I'm going to stop my share. I mean, kind of, yeah. I mean, I don't know if Michael has a link handy enough to find it, but there's a add-in called Fast Excel that Charles Williams creates, and he has something in there to measure performance of formulas and stuff.
I can look for it and share. I know I've been in a session where I demoed it. Okay, so all right, I see that there are no more questions, so I'll ask you one last question. We always, I'm sure we've asked you the last time you were in here, so maybe what I'll do is I'll do a different version. Because most of the people in here, I don't think they were the same audience we had the last time we had you come in. So the question is more about, what your advice is for people just starting out, people who they are, there's a whole lot of the landscape is changing. Even Microsoft is making Excel difficult to catch up with in terms of features. I've seen people who they are amazed by new things. They go back to their Excel, they can't try it out, and they find out that they're on the wrong version. So even Excel itself is becoming something that people are having multiple versions with different capabilities. But then there are other tools, Power BI, there's Python, there's so many things in the mix now for a data analyst. So we would like to ask your advice on how people should decide on what tools to use, how to be good at, using Excel in a business setting, not just to learn it and have the knowledge, but to be able to work as a professional data analyst. So what will be your advice to someone who is having those kind of confusion? I mean, is that word?
Yeah, God, that was a big question, Michael. It's difficult, and even I mean, I can't speak for Michael, but for myself, just the amount of stuff that's coming out, in both Power BI and Excel, these kind of monthly updates. I personally do get a bit overwhelmed at times by it, because you go into audiences and people call you MVP for what we care about that. So people expect that you're like amazing and you know Python and you know how to write M and you know how to write DAX and you know how to write. So no, I don't know all this stuff. I'm trying to keep up. You know how to use Fabric. It's almost impossible. So I think a lot of people kind of stick to a niche. So I guess the first thing is not to be overwhelmed by that stuff. Just, try and focus on what's important for what you're trying to do. Nobody knows everything, or if they know it, they're not an expert at everything. They might be really good at Power Query, but maybe they're not so great at, natively writing M code. Because I mean, you can't know that with DAX and Python and everything else. If you did, then I don't know, maybe you don't sleep, or maybe you shouldn't be doing this. You're far too smart. But yeah, don't be overwhelmed by this stuff. Just take it as you can. Attending meetups like this is obviously extremely helpful. both in terms of networking with other people, in terms of like jobs and help, but also learning obviously from other people and people better than myself. And sending my meetup as well. And what I normally tell a lot of people when I do my Excel training, I normally bore a lot of people with this, but it's to focus on the fundamentals. Is what I always say. So I've done this session today on array constants, but I talk to a lot of people about just being able to understand the fundamentals, like the data structures. Whether it be query, table, array constant, spill range, because at the end of the day, talking from an Excel perspective, just ignoring Power BI for the moment, everything comes, from data. You need data. Whatever I'm doing, pivot table, chart, formula, I need data. So if you can understand where that data's come from, like how to access it, like how does it update? How do I refresh? Do I have to press a button? Does it refresh automatically? If I insert a column, what happens? Does that break it? Does it work? Like if you can understand the data structure, I think is always key. Learning the things that use it is not so difficult, but getting that solid base, would be where my focus would be.
Thank you very much. And I think we can bring the session to a close now. Thank you once again for, this wonderful session. I know it will be via email, right? You said you're going to share the file, right?
Oh, yes, I can do it, yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
So we'll find a way to include it in the upload of the recording and get it to the community members. So to everyone who's joined, thank you very much. And also to Alan, thank you for the patience through the team's frustration experienced. It's amazing with teams. You can't predict. So thank you. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful week ahead. And thank you again, and see you. Well, to our audience, see you next week, to Alan. Hopefully, we'll see you in February at the Global Exec Summit.
Awesome. Absolutely, mate. Yeah. Cheers, Michael. Thanks, everybody. Take care.